This is the No Waste Tote Bag. This video is a tote bag tutorial that shows you how to sew a bag with little to no waste. Using the layout supplied, you will have only a few small slithers of fabric waste at the end. Let's start with the outside features. You can see there are two pockets either side and there's an outside zipper under a flap. On the inside there's a magnetic clasp along the top and lots of pockets. Let me turn it the wrong way out so that you can see it properly. There's 6 slip pockets inside this bag, including one at the top next to 3 pen slots and a bigger one underneath. There's also a key strap for keeping your keys easily accessible. On the side we have a cup holder and the final inside little slip pocket next to that. This is a really fun bag pattern that was originally part of the 77 Club. You can find out the details for that and where to get the pattern in the description below. So let's jump in and happy sewing. You can find the pattern in the link in the description below. Now, due to the nature of this bag, it is called the No Waste Tote for a reason. You can either cut it out of a full kind of panel of fabric, 1/2 meter for your outer fabric and 3/4 meter for your lining fabric, or of course you can use scraps. Now, I always interface my fabric before I cut out, so you're going to want to do that. You're going to want to do that in the usual manner. We are using woven interfacing for your outer fabric and non-woven for your lining, but by all means you could use non-woven or your regular interfacing, that is for your outer if you want to. It just won't be quite as stable, as stiff as if you were using woven. Okay, so now you've interfaced all your fabrics, your outer and your lining. You're then going to want to go ahead to cutting out your fabrics. Now, because of the nature of this, the No Waste Tote, there is an included layout in the pattern. So you're going to want to follow that, lay out all your pieces, or use a ruler or use a ruler to draw out your pieces. I like to draw it all out first, and then I go ahead and cut it all out with a rotary cutter. But of course you can choose your preferred method. I like to draw it all out first in case there's a little bit of tweaking that needs to be done, or I need to make sure my lines are straight, that kind of thing. I use a combination of the ruler and the pattern pieces to go ahead and do that. The lining pieces have of course a few extra pieces as well, so you're going to want to do that as well, cut those out as well. Included in the pattern you're also going to find these labels. So I find it much easier to print those out and attach those to your pattern pieces as you go. You're also going to want to draw on or write on your each pattern piece which is the top. This is going to find it easier as you go along when you come to stitching it. I now write on all my pattern pieces which piece is the top, or which side is the top, so that you can do that and it doesn't become too confusing as you go along. One thing to note as well is that with the zipper pocket, the way that you lay it out on the layout, the top will be kind of different to how you imagine it to be. You imagine the top to be here, but actually the top is here as it's shown in red. This is just to make it lay out really nicely to, you know, use every single scrap of the fabric. But of course, if you're using scraps or if you've got a directional print, then you're going to want to bear that in mind. You're also going to want to cut out your your fusible fleece panels. You can use fusible foam if you would prefer. You're going to get a kind of stiffer or different look to your tote bag. So once you've cut everything out, you're then going to want to fuse the fusible fleece or foam, if you're using foam, to your main panels and your 2 side panels. And you're going to want to center them so that they are outside of the seam allowance. Then we're going to pop those to one side. The hardware for this bag is pretty minimal. You're going to need a 23 centimeter zip. You're going to need a lobster clasp for the key strap, and you're also going to need a magnetic snap. You may want to add a second magnetic snap, that's totally up to you. One of my testers did this and they loved it. You're also going to want to be using a universal or microtex needle to get through those layers. A walking foot is preferable, and you're probably going to want to use some double-sided tape when it comes to the zipper. Plus, of course, you're going to want to have your regular clips and pins and scissors and all your regular sewing tools. So we're going to start on our handles first. So you want to grab all your pattern piece 4 pieces, and we've got our 4 outers and our 4 linings. Okay, and if you've used scraps, you could of course cut these as one piece. It mentions that in the pattern as well, but to make this no waste, we have cut these in half. So we're going to place them right sides together, and I'm going to pop a clip in the short edge, in one short edge. And I'm going to do the same with the lining while we're here. Right sides together. And right sides together. And we're going to sew along those short edges, and they're going to be 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So I've stitched those 4 pieces. I'm now going to open them up and press the seam open. Then I'm going to take one outer piece and one lining piece, and I'm going to lay them right sides together. Just want to make sure that I match up that seam line. And I'm going to stitch right the way down one long edge, and that's going to be with 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, which is 0.65 centimetres. So just over 1/2 centimetre, 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. While I'm there, I'm going to do that with the other one as well. So right sides together and 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so now that that's stitched, we then want to have it with the outer fabric wrong side up. So my lining fabric is wrong side down, and then we're going to lift up that bottom edge, and we're lifting that up and folding it by 1/4 of an inch again. So you're mimicking the other side, 1/4 inch seam allowance, and we're going to press that all the way along. Once you've done that, we're going to flip it over so that we've got the lining wrong side up, and we're going to pull up the seam allowance along the bottom so that it matches that outer one, again by 1/4 of an inch, and then press all the way along again. Once that's pressed, we're going to open it up, and what we can do to help us here is we can open up that middle seam, the seam that is stitched that is connecting the outer to the lining. So we can stick our fingernail in there and open up that seam, and then press all the way along. That's going to give you a really nice crisp edge. It's just going to help everything. So once that's all really nicely pressed, we can then fold the two together, and we will end up with a 1 inch handle or strap. So we want to fold it, and then we're going to press it in place again. Once you've given it a good press, you're going to want to clip it all the way along, and then we're going to repeat that with the other handle. So then you end up with 2 handles clipped or pinned, ready to go. Then we're going to take them over to the sewing machine, and we're going to top stitch 1/8 of an inch or a few millimeters from each edge. I like to start on the open edge to stop it going wavy, and also I start at the same end each time. Then we're going to move on to pattern piece 3, which is the side pockets. So you're going to have 2 outers and 2 linings. And your outers and your linings are both going in the same direction. The lining is opposite of the outer, and the outer is opposite of the lining, but they are not opposites of each other. And that is because we needed to cut them to make them fit into our layout. Okay, so you're going to grab 1 lining and 1 outer, and you're going to place them right sides together. And you're going to do the same with the other one as well. Then we're going to take them over to the machine, and we're going to stitch a 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance along those diagonal seam lines. Then we're going to open them up, and then we're going to top stitch 1/8 of an inch or a couple of millimeters from the edge. So now I have stitched those, I've top stitched those. I'm then going to add those to our pattern piece 2, which is our side panels. And I'm going to baste them around the edges. So I want to get rid of my 2 linings for a minute. And you can, at this point, you can choose whether you want to have them lining side out to add a little bit of feature to your bag, or you can keep them so that the outside is on the outside. So we're going to clip and then baste within the seam allowance, so about 1/2 centimetre around the two sides and the bottom edge. And we're going to do that on both side panels. So now I've basted around those 3 edges on both sides. I'm then going to just cut off this little ear, this little bunny ear, if you like. I'm just going to cut that off because we don't need that. Same on the other one as well. And then I'm going to pop those to one side. Then we're going to move along to our outside zipper pocket. So for this, we're going to, of course, need our zipper. We're going to need our pattern piece 6, which is the zipper pocket, and we're going to need our pattern piece 5, which is the zipper flap, the 2 pieces for that. And we're also going to need our outside main, which is pattern piece 1. So we're going to grab our pattern piece 5s, our zipper flaps. So we're going to place them right sides together, making sure that we've got the top at the top of the table. And then we're going to stitch along the short edge, all the way along the bottom, and then up the other short edge. And we're going to use our regular 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now you may notice as I'm sewing this that I haven't put any pins in. It's totally up to you whether you use pins or not. I am using a walking foot, which I always highly recommend. That is going to help stop your fabric from stretching. You've also got that interfacing on there, which is going to help ease that too. You can put pins in if you want, and also you can use clips. Totally up to you. Next, I'm going to clip the corners. Just take away that bulk in the seam allowance. And I'm also going to turn it. Then I'm going to press it, and I'm going to top stitch a couple of millimeters or 1/8 of an inch from the edge, just on those 3 sides that we've sewn. Also completely optional at this stage, you can add in a little tag onto the front of your zipper flap as well. So we're going to pop our zipper flap to one side, and we're going to grab our outer main panel, and then we want to grab our zipper pocket as well, and we want to lay our zipper pocket pattern piece 6 on top, centered. Let's find our centers. So I've marked the centers, and I'm going to place pattern piece 6 so that it is 1.5 centimeters down from that top edge. And then we're going to mark a rectangle that is 6 centimeters or 2/8 of an inch down from the top of the pattern piece 1, the outer main panel. And it's going to be 21 centimeters or 8¼ inches wide by 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch high. And of course, it's going to be centered. You can also use the template that comes with the pattern as well. You're just going to need to cut that out, place that on top of pattern piece 1 and draw that in place. So now that's drawn on, I'm going to stitch along that rectangle, and again I'm going to use my regular 2.5 stitch length. At the corners and at the ends I'm going to go down to about a 1.5 so that it makes it really tight stitching on those corners, and it means you can hit that corner really nicely. Next, we're going to cut the middle of the triangle. So we're going to need to cut a kind of fork at each end, and then a line right the way down the middle. You don't have to draw it, I've just drawn it on so it makes it a little bit easier for you to see. And you're cutting through all of the layers here. And when you come to the fork, you want to cut as close as you can to that stitching without cutting the stitching. It's really important we don't snip those stitches. Okay, then we're going to push the whole thing of the lining, the whole lining piece I should say, right the way through to the other side. And what you can do here, if you're finding that the fleece is a little bulky, we can snip that down to help with the turning of the lining. Just on that seam allowance. Again, being careful not to snip those stitches. Then to get that to sit really nicely, we're then going to press that in place. It's important that your iron doesn't touch the fleece because the iron won't like it and it will melt the fleece. So definitely using a Teflon sheet at this point is really helpful. And you may find that you need to pull the fabric a little bit just to kind of make sure that the fibres go into that nice rectangle. Don't be afraid to use a little steam as well. That helps to kind of loosen the fibres a bit and make it move into those rectangles too, or those corners. Turn it over and make sure it is exactly how we want it to be. And then we're going to place our zipper behind. So you can choose which way your zipper opens. I like to have mine on the left because I'm right-handed, but that is completely personal preference. One thing you may want to do before you stitch your zipper on as well is to just baste and burn the ends. So I'm going to burn the ends first of my zipper. This is a rechargeable lighter, which is super handy because there's so many times I've run out of the lighter fluid in my lighter. So I will pop a link to this in the description in case you're interested in this. Looks a bit weird, but it's really cool. And then what I do is I just feed the teeth back in on the open end of the zipper. That makes it a lot easier for stitching. And then what you can do is you can then baste the ends on the machine. When you're putting in your zipper, it's really handy to have double-sided tape. So I'm going to place the double-sided tape along the top of the zipper. You always want to make sure that you use quilter's tape so that it doesn't gum up your needle. And you want to place your zipper so that it's central to that rectangle. Now you have to do it a little bit blind to begin with, but we can turn it over and tweak it to make sure it's sitting in there nicely. Once you've got that nicely centralized and where you want it to be, we're then going to top stitch about 2 millimeters or 1/8 of an inch from the edge all the way around the rectangle. Okay, so now that our zipper is nicely placed in there, we're going to flip the whole piece over and we're going to match up the top of the zipper pocket with the bottom of the lining. And we're going to clip or pin around those 3 open edges, and then we're going to stitch 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch from the edge all the way around. Now when we sew this, you're going to find it a lot easier to do it from the pattern piece one side up, and then you want to sort of crunch that piece out of the way, out of the seam allowance, and stitch around. I also like to use a zipper foot when I'm doing this because it helps me get closer to those zipper teeth and keep my seam allowance. Okay, so our pocket is all stitched up. Then we're going to flip the whole piece over and I'm going to grab my zipper flap that we stitched earlier, and I'm going to place that centered on top of the bag, and I'm going to baste it within the seam allowance all the way along the top just to keep it all together. So now we're going to start sewing the bag together, the outer bag. So we've got our outer panel that we've just stitched. We're going to turn that on the side and we're going to grab the 2 side panels that we put the pockets on earlier. We don't need the linings yet. And we're going to stitch the side panel to the front. Now you want to make sure that the two tops are aligned. We're going to place them along, matching the side seams up, and we're going to sew along that seam with the 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and we're going to stop 1 centimetre from that bottom edge. Also, while we're at the machine, we're going to do the other side. So I'm going to pin that in place so that I can do both seams at the same time. Now, as you're sewing these seams, you want to make sure that you do not catch the zipper flap. The zipper flap has been designed to be slightly shorter to keep out of those seams, and the seam line should lie just past the zipper flap, so you shouldn't catch it as you sew. Okay, so now that that's stitched, we're then going to grab our other front panel, the outer piece. So we're going to put the lining to one side, and we're going to make sure that our tops are lined up together, and we're going to line up each side seam. So I'm just going to clip them in place, and it's the side pocket or the side panel that we're lining up with that back piece. Okay, so then we're going to stitch, same as we did before, we're going to stitch along that seam, and we're going to stop 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch from that edge. And we're going to do the same on the other side panel as well. It's important to note as well that on this main panel pattern piece 1, there is a notch mark. So if you want to, you can mark that in place, and that helps you to know where your stitching is going to stop. Now we've got the outside side panels on our bag. We're then going to fold it so that the side seams meet, and we're matching up that bottom seam, and we're going to clip and sew along the bottom of that seam, again 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch from the edge. Okay, now we've got our bottom seam stitched up. We're then going to fold the bag so that we can align up the boxed corners. Okay, now at this point, it's going to be a bit tricky to do that. So what we need to do is we need to snip in basically where the notch marks are on the pattern, which is where the end of your stitching is. Okay, so we're just going to snip into the outer fabric, the outer panels, not the side panels, and we're cutting just shy of 2 millimeters or 1/8 of an inch from that seam. We don't want to cut into the stitches, again just on that outer fabric, and we're going to do that on both sides. And then you should be able to pinch and open it up so that you can match up those seams, and then we're going to stitch 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch from that edge. Also, while we're sewing, we're going to open up that bottom seam so that that seam lies really nice and flat. You don't really want to push the seam allowance to one side or the other, because that's going to create a little bit of bulk. Okay, so now that those bottom panels are stitched, we're then going to cut off the corners, just like you would do normally, to reduce the bulk. And then we're going to turn the whole thing the right way out. And we're going to grab our handles, and we are going to measure 1.5 inches from each edge of the side seam. Just going to pop a little pin in there. And I'm going to place the handle on top so that it is right sides together, not lining side. And I'm going to fold it around and match up the outside of the handle with that pin again and clip in place so that the raw edges are aligned with the top of the bag. Then I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to do the same on the back as well. Then I'm going to baste those handles on within the seam allowance, so about 1/2 centimetre, which is about 1/4 inch. Now, although I'm basting this, I am using a 2.5 stitch length, just because that's going to add a little bit extra strength because it's for the handles. Okay, then we're going to place our outer bag to one side and we're going to work on the lining. The first thing we're going to work on is our key clip strap, which is our pattern piece 7. And of course, you're going to need your lobster clasp for that as well. So we're going to make a mark right the way down the middle of our strap. And then we're going to fold the strap along that line. Then we're going to open it up again and we're going to fold the fabric up to meet that fold line, and we're going to do that on both sides, and then we're going to fold it again and we're going to press. You can do this in stages if you like, or you can do it like me and do it all at once. Basically, we're doing the same as what we did for the handles. Now that that's pressed, what we're then going to do is we're going to open it up, place the fabric right sides together like that, one end, one short end, and we're going to stitch 1 centimetre or 3/8 inch along that short edge. Then we're going to snip a little triangle off of that corner and we're going to fold it right sides out. I'm going to use a little pokey tool. And then where you've pressed it, you then want to open up that seam that we've just stitched and fold it in so that it goes back to being how you pressed it. It's a little fiddle, but it will work. And that's how you can get an enclosed end. I'm then going to clip all the way along and I'm going to top stitch each side. So I'm going to go along the long edge, up the short edge and back along the long edge. As usual with the top stitching, it's about 2 millimeters or about 1/8 inch from the edge, and we are using a 3.5 stitch length, but of course your machine may be different and you may prefer a different length. Okay, now that's top stitched, we're then going to put our lobster clasp on the closed end and we're going to fold it over with 1 inch overlap. I'm going to pop a clip in there and then I'm going to stitch to enclose it. Now you can either stitch with 1 line of stitching or 2 lines of stitching, or you can do a barn door, which is a rectangle or a square, but in this case a rectangle with a cross in the middle to make it really nice and secure, or finally you could use a rivet. Okay, so now that that has been stitched, we're going to grab one of our lining pattern piece 1s. Going to have it right side up and we're going to measure down from the left edge and we're going to measure down 3.5 inches or just under 9 centimeters. You can do it 9 centimeters, doesn't have to be completely accurate. 3.5 inches down, and we're going to baste the key strap in place along that edge, and it's going to be within the seam allowance, so about 1/2 centimetre. Okay, so I've basted that in place. I'm going to pop that to one side and we're going to come back to that in a minute. I'm just going to keep it nicely in place, just going to quickly pop a pin in the key holder just to stop it wiggling around when we come back to stitching it later. Then we are going to grab the cup holder, which is pattern piece 8, and we're going to place that right sides together along the long edge, and we're going to stitch 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch from that edge. Then I'm going to reach through and turn it the right way out. Then we're going to top stitch along each long edge, and that's going to be, as usual, about 1/8 of an inch or 2 millimeters from the edge. Okay, so now we've top stitched that, we're then going to grab the outer pattern piece 1 that we stitched earlier with the key strap on it, and we're going to measure down and we're going to baste our cup holder in place. You want to make sure that the seam is facing the bottom of your bag, and also that you've only got one piece. You don't want to be sewing through both of those like I nearly did then. And that's going to be 20 centimeters down, or 7 7/8 of an inch. And we're just lining up one short edge, the other edge is left open. So I'm going to baste that within the seam allowance. I then want to just clip the other loose short edge out of the way, so I'm going to clip that together, and we're going to pop that to one side. And we're going to grab our 2 pen slots, pattern piece 10, and we're going to place them right sides together along that top edge, and we're going to place them right sides together along the long edge, and we're going to stitch all the way along that long edge, as usual, with our 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch seam. Then we're going to open up that seam and we're going to press it open. And we're going to fold the whole piece so that it's right sides together, and that seam that we've just stitched is running top to bottom. And I'm going to just pop a pin in there, and we're going to stitch around those 3 sides, but we're going to leave an opening of about 3 to 4 inches along one side. Okay, now that's stitched, I'm going to cut off the corners to cut down on the bulk in the seam allowance. And I'm going to reach through my turning hole and I'm going to turn it the right way out. Then I'm going to make sure that my seam allowance is folded under or in for the turning hole, and I'm going to give the whole thing a press. Okay, and then we're going to grab our back main lining. Just going to unpin that key strap for now and make sure the cup holder is out of the way. This pocket, the pen pockets, are going to be centered, and they're going to be 7 centimeters or 2 3/4 inches down from the top. And you want the seam that you stitched in the pen pockets to be at the bottom as well. I'm going to place a couple of pins in there to keep that in place. And then we're going to stitch 2 millimeters or about 1/8 of an inch around those 3 edges. Now when you're stitching on pockets, it's a really good idea to go backwards and forwards a couple times at the top. While we're at the machine, we're also going to use that middle stitch line that we sewed when we made the pen pockets, and we're going to stitch in the ditch to make 2 separate pockets. Next, what we can do, and this is a bit optional, is I'm going to mark 3 centimeters, 2 lines of 3 centimeters all the way down, and I'm using a friction pen so that it can disappear, and then we're going to stitch those to make our separate pen pockets. going to put that to one side for a second. And we're going to grab our pattern piece 9, which is the slip pocket. And we're going to do the same as we did with the pen pockets at the beginning. So we're going to place it right sides together. Pop a couple of pins in there. And we're going to stitch along those 3 edges, but we're going to leave, again, a turning hole of around 4 inches on one side. Then we're going to clip the corners. Going to reach through and turn it the right way out. And I'm going to give that a quick press, making sure to turn in the seam allowance. Okay, then I'm going to top stitch along the non-seam edge, a couple of millimeters or 1/8 of an inch. Then I'm going to place that piece on top of our lining, which has got our pocket pieces in, and I'm going to pin that on so that it is 10 centimeters down from that top edge, and of course we're going to center it. And then we're going to top stitch around those 3 edges, again being sure to go backwards and forwards at the beginning and the end. Then we're going to start making up the lining of the bag. So we're going to grab our 2 side pieces and we're going to place them right sides down. So we're doing very similar to how we did the outside of the bag, how we stitched that up. I'm just going to turn that on its side. And I'm just checking that the top matches the top. I don't think there's any direction to my fabric, so it doesn't matter massively, but I'm still going to do that just in case. And then I'm going to place a couple of pins in, and we're going to stitch along the left hand side to begin with. And we're going to sew it just like we did before. So the left hand side, we're going to sew all the way along that edge, but we're going to stop 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch from the edge. I'm just going to mark that on to make sure that I do that in the right place. And then when it comes to the right hand side, I'm going to make my mark again so that I stop in it with enough room at the bottom, and we're going to leave around 7 inches of a turning hole along that edge. It does give you measurements for how much to sew each edge, but you can also, within the instructions I should say, but you can also eyeball it as well. That was a classic case of not concentrating there. I overstepped to the mark and I started sewing up the turning hole area. So don't worry if you do that. I've just gone back, reinforced where I should have stopped so that it doesn't unravel when I go to birth the bag. And then I'm just going to unpick those stitches and it will all be fine. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is we want to attach the raw edge of our cup holder onto the side panel. Okay, so we want to make sure that it's lined up. So what I do is I'm just going to fold the cup holder and then see where it lays. I'm just going to pop a clip in there, and then I'm just going to use my tape measure and check that the measurement is the same along this edge as it is along this edge. Once that's clipped in place, I'm then going to measure along by 8 centimeters and make a little mark. So then we're going to baste within the seam allowance along that outer edge, and then we're going to pivot and we're going to do a top stitching stitch a couple of millimeters from that bottom edge along and then up that where we've made that mark to make the pocket. Don't forget to go backwards and forwards at the top of the pocket to make it really strong. Okay, now that that's in place, we're going to grab our other main panel and we're going to match up. So it's just the same as we did on the outer bag. We're going to match up those seams and we're going to clip and then stitch all the way along, and we're going to make sure we stop 1 centimetre from the end. While we're at it, we're also going to do the other side panel to the other long edge of the main panel. Now the sides are sewn up, we're going to sew up that bottom seam. So it's just the same as we did on the outer piece of the bag, the outer fabric. Sometimes I change between pins and clips, depending on how I feel. Pins I can sew over, because if I pin them in at a 90-degree angle to the seam, we can stitch right over them. And I've just lined up that central mark as well. We're going to sew all the way along that seam. Okay, just like we did before, we're going to make a snip in the 2 layers where the bottom of that line of stitching is along the edges, so that we can box the bottom. Again, we're not going right up into those stitches because we don't want to snip into them. And then we're going to place those 2 pieces together. So we've got the bottom seam in the middle of the side panel. And then we're going to pin and sew that together. Next, it's time to put in our magnetic snap. So we're going to measure down on this lining 3.5 centimetres or 1 3/8 of an inch. Make a mark. We're going to do that on the other side as well. And I'm following that central mark that we made. Or if you didn't make it earlier, you can also just measure into half of that pattern piece to find your middle. And then I've got some cut out pieces of Decaville here, and I'm going to press those in place so that that middle point that we've just drawn is in the middle of those Decaville pieces. So apparently my camera decided not to film the insertion of the magnetic snaps, but once I've got the Decaville on the back, on the inside of the lining, I then used the prongs of the magnetic snaps to find the placement. I used my scissors to cut through carefully to make the 2 holes from the back through to the front, and then I put the snap, one side of the snap, through those holes that I've made, through to the back, put the washer on, and open the prongs. Now, if you're worried that the prongs are a bit rough, you can also put a little bit of duct tape over there to help protect the other fabric. And I've done that on both the front and the back of the lining. It doesn't really matter whether you put the female or the male on either side, totally up to you which you choose. Then we're going to sew the bag together. So you want to grab your outer bag, and I've placed it so that it's, or turned it so that it's the right side in, because we want them to be right sides together. Now you want to match up the plain lining side with that zipper flap, the zipper pocket, and the lining side with all the pockets in against the plain of the outer. And we're matching up the seams as we go around, and we're opening up the seam allowance so that there's no bulk on those bits. And we're going to clip or pin all the way around, matching up the seams as we go. So we're matching up the side panels first, the front and the back, and then we're going to stitch it with a 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. One thing I like to do after I've stitched around is also to just reinforce those handles. So I'm sewing within the seam allowance, and I'm just going backwards and forwards where the handle pieces are to just give it a little bit more strength. Okay, so that's all sewn. We're then going to turn it the right way out. So I'm going to pull the lining out first of all. Find that turning hole, which is there, and then I'm going to reach through and pull the outer bag through that hole. And we can turn the whole thing out the right way. You can reach your hand through as well, push out all those corners, get it sitting really nicely. And then we're going to grab our iron and we're going to press the bag or the lining inside the bag just to keep it in the right place. Be careful when you're pressing this because you don't want to get your iron too close to that magnet because it may affect the magnetizing field. And we're going to press all the way around, and then we're going to top stitch a couple of millimeters or about 1/8 of an inch from the edge all the way around to finish the bag. Now you may want to go up to a jeans needle. I normally use a Microtex needle, but for this top stitching, I'm going to use a jeans 110 needle just to get through all those layers really easily. So now that we've top stitched around the top, we're then going to reach through to the lining and find our turning hole. Now you can either machine stitch this or you can hand stitch this closed using a ladder stitch or a baseball stitch or even a whip stitch, whichever is your preference basically. I'm going to do this on the machine though. Then we're just going to pop the lining back inside the bag and we are done. Really hope that you've loved this tutorial. Please do give it a go, and if you do, don't forget to tag me on socials so I can see it and share it too. I love seeing what you've made. Coming up on the screen right now is a really fun tutorial that I think you're going to love. It's called the Ina bag. It is a fun twist on a classic shaped crossbody. I'll see you on the next video.